So why don't we start right at the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about what your business is and why we're interviewing you. And then kind of just explain a bit of the history, and then we'll just kind of go in there with some details. Jason Hine, my Ed McMahon, will jump in with random comments, and we'll go from there. We'll play from there. So why don't you, who wants to start? Just share a little bit about the business and what you do.
And then I'll do some history.
Yeah.
He's already telling me what to do. He's already telling me what to do.
Mr. Edwards is telling the son how to work. I get how this relationship is already.
Well, I'm Morgan Edwards. Bill Edwards, my father. We own and operate Saskatoon Funeral Home. We've been in Saskatoon, operating Saskatoon Funeral Home since 1910. And my dad can...
When you say we, you don't mean we,
yeah,
right? 1910?
I mean, look pretty good.
Bill looks good for that, but...
Yeah, we, I guess...
Embalming works really well.
Yeah, it's...
The fluids, yeah, exactly. Wow.
That was awesome, guys. Really good.
Sorry, so 1910. See, this is how it goes. We'll try to behave ourselves.
Yeah, I guess with family business, as anyone can attest to, we use that word "we" all the time, and yeah, our staff as well, our families. So when I say "we," you feel like you're part of that legacy all the time, and it's grown exponentially. Over the years, especially when Dad took over, he'll probably mention a bit about that when he took over, getting more involved in the funeral home. Dad is, as many of you probably know, the epitome of what an entrepreneur is, and always some new bright ideas, and there's some big shoes to fill there, but it's just amazing. It's overwhelming sometimes when I look back at it.
So I'll tell this to Bill. So since you've been running the funeral home since the Cubs won their last World Series.
I love the Cubs.
Yeah, so do I.
I love Chicago.
So Bill, how did you start into the business? Because you're also an architect.
Yeah.
So why don't you kind of walk us through that? It was your dad's business. You obviously started your own thing and then slowly migrated back.
So I think I was in grade 3. When I walked down the Broadway Bridge to the old funeral home, some people in the room might know where it was. It was at the end of 2nd Avenue, down by the old arena.
Okay.
Yeah, so anyway, so that's where I started, and worked in summers and whatnot. But in our family business, we've always encouraged the next generation to get out and do what they want to do, right? So even my dad, he was a social work graduate from the University of Toronto, and that's where he was when my grandfather phoned him and said, "Do you have any interest in coming back to Saskatchewan?" Yeah. And he did, right? Didn't have to, but he did. I went through architecture school, got my master's. My brother, who's 8 years younger, followed me. And we have a business here in Edwards & Edwards Architects, but I started with Mel Malkin, and my brother worked at the city, of all places, but then he joined us. But then as my dad was slowly retiring, semi-retiring, my brother and sister and I are on the board of directors. I would do a little bit more of the funeral stuff, the banking or this, so it would be 10% funeral home, 90% architecture. This time, then it was 20-80, then it was 50-50, right? And then it was just the opposite. It was 10% architecture, 90% funeral home. So, and then my brother joined me, and he started taking over more of the architecture business. So over about a 10-year period, it was just everybody just kind of shifted to the right.
So then how did you come into this, Morgan? So, because I know you graduated 2001, I think you said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Good memory.
Yeah, like 40 minutes ago. I put it in my calendar, to be honest. Okay, you said, no. So 2001, you remembered. 2001, you graduate from Commerce, and you didn't jump right into the funeral home, right? So where did you go?
Well, I was in College of Commerce, and anyone in family business, or we're members also of Canadian Association of Family Enterprise, and we're back at that point as well, and a real encouragement to go elsewhere before starting in a family business, so you know what else is out there, and without jumping right into a family business and then second guessing, should I have done this? Is there something better out there? where's the limit, that sort of thing. It gave a chance to really see where your strengths are and build some skills. And Dad might mention make your mistakes somewhere else. So, but I worked with the Saskatchewan Abilities Council. So day of my last exam, I'm not a real forward thinker. I so looked in the newspaper and there was this ad for marketing representative, and well, marketing's part of my business degree. I'll apply, and fortunately got the job with the Abilities Council, and was there nearly 10 years helping people with disabilities find work in Saskatoon. Worked with a lot of the local businesses and owners that are in the room today, actually. So it's a lot of transferable skills as well, moving into this environment of funeral directing.
You obviously graduate, you take this business, and now you decide to come and work in the family business. And with that comes some skills that you need to train for as well, right? And you are, I don't know how to say it, but are you fully licensed as a funeral? Like, yeah, I don't, that's not the right word, but you can do everything?
That's exactly the right language. So in Saskatoon, and we're fortunate enough at Saskatchewan Polytechnic to have a funeral service program. It's about an 18-month program that corresponds with work you do in the industry. And I'm a licensed funeral director and a licensed embalmer. Okay. My grandfather was as well. And moving into a role at the funeral home, starting from the ground up, just decided early on that it's important to know everything about the business, especially if I'm going to be moving into the role of managing my colleagues, to understand what they're going through, and also to be able to communicate with families every part of the job that we do for them. So it was important to learn everything as best I could.
And as a leader, there's got to be some impact with your team, knowing that there's some empathy, because you understand the hours, you understand the stresses, you understand every aspect, right? So do you feel like that's given some weight as a fairly young guy running a business?
I think that's a really good comment, because it's tough to expect, and I'm sure in your business you know the exact same thing. It's tough to expect those grueling hours from your colleagues or your staff if you haven't been down that road as well. If you haven't helped that family of a child who's passed away, and then you're asking your staff to do it, really to know the emotions you're going through and be able to say, I understand and I get it. Yeah.
So walk us through why 10 years? I mean, 10 years with Sask Abilities, and then you decide to go back into the family business and do that in a very different line of business. Walk us through how that went, and then maybe tell us a little bit about the challenges making the move and sort of the day-to-day challenges.
Sure. The 10 years wasn't like a set timeline that I made back when I joined the Abilities Council. It just happened that right around that time we had two main funeral directors moving into different parts of the industry. Randy Shabailo, who managed our Westwood Funeral Chapel, is now executive director of the Riversdale Improvement Bid, and he was moving into a new role, so there were some shoes to fill there, and another one of our colleagues moved into working for the city. So it was a chance to get in when there was a need rather than a make work project, because I think the respect just wouldn't be there if you're kind of this third wheel, hey guys, I'm here to help out.
Like Jason.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, Bill, I know, you've had the most experience in terms of the two in this business, just because you've grown up in it longer. I know you guys have the cremation place on the highway where the clock's always wrong.
That's right. And the temperature.
Yeah, and the temperature. It's always wrong.
That's your car.
Yeah.
It's the clock in your car that's wrong.
I don't doubt that. Though Ford did guarantee me. No. So you guys had that cremation spot. When was that built? And was that like the first in the city or province?
Yeah, first in the province, actually. Part of our family history seems to back to my grandfather in 1910, to kind of be at the front edge of a lot of things. We had the first motorized ambulance service in the province. Oh, wow. And then following that, first funeral coach that had not horses, but actually had horsepower. In 1970, There was no crematorium in the province at all. If you wanted to be cremated back then, it was a big commitment. The deceased would be shipped by train to Winnipeg for the cremation to take place, right? So my mom and dad opened that crematorium in 1970 on the highway to Regina. It was the only one for a number of years. But they saw the trend coming, right? And looking back at the books, I think we were in the red for 8 years before we actually broke even on it. But now...
Why was it way out there? Because back in 70, that would have been way out there. Like,
well, the city bylaws prevented a crematorium being built in the city. And that land was there, and the building was there. 2 guys had built that building. They were going to raise... They're like mink, ermine. They were going to have an ermine ranch and make a lot of money. And that relationship...
That went well. I see a lot of ermine coats
that's
around.
Right. So that...
I don't even know what ermine is. I was just nodding. Yeah, I know ermine.
So the land was there, and some of you might know Jack McFall from years gone by. He helped put the deal together, so it was a perfect fit, right? As the city grows, it's only about 7 miles out, but we got all that land, and we now have a pet crematorium there, another first. So we have an operation that looks after pets and humans, and we're actually looking at a new process now that's it's called alkali hydrolysis. It's a liquid-based cremation process that we're investigating. So we're always looking at what's the next step, what can we be doing, stick to our knitting, of course, of what we're about, but looking at ways we can meet needs and keep growing. Yeah.
Who else's mind went crazy when he said a liquid crematorium? It was like,
We actually have samples of the machines.
Yeah, exactly.
No, we're in a distillery, I promise.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's weird to talk, like, from my perspective, because I absolutely understand that it's a business and a very needed business, but it's weird when you think about death and that there's businesses competing and stuff. So how many funeral homes are there in the area, and how does that work? Like, is there synergies between the two? I mean, are you chasing ambulances? Like, how do you do that?
Life and death.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny you mentioned chasing ambulances. One of my first weeks working for the funeral home, I was coming back from the crematorium, Highway 11, in the hearse, and I'm driving along, and then I realize I'm behind an ambulance. This looks terrible. So I slowed right down and let him go, and just, especially the name Saskatoon Funeral Home right across the side of your car.
It looks even worse if you ram it.
Yeah, exactly.
From behind, and
So no, but I'll let Dad mention the kind of competitive climate. He has a good handle on that.
I mean, before you do, I mean, I guess everyone, the old adage, like death and taxes, right? So it's like, well, they kind of come to you on a regular basis. But yeah, talk to us about how it is competitive out there and what are the challenges?
Yeah, it's a changing business, industry. It's always growing. For the last 20 years, there's been a huge consolidation in industry across North America. Large chains, corporations buying up small mom and pops across US and Canada. In Saskatoon, we have one major competitor from Toronto that operates a chain, and they have a funeral home in a cemetery and one downtown. Another competitor we have is a corporation called SCI out of Houston, Texas. And they're the largest in the world, and they have...
So there's literally funeral homes that are like multinational?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. SCI has funeral homes in Europe, Australia, and North America. Big chains. And then there's some smaller independent funeral homes who we work very closely with. Like Westwood, for instance, was, we and Westwood were the last independent funeral homes in the city at one point, and we'd had a relationship to do buying together, a buying group and that kind of thing. And there was a move put on them by one of the multinationals to buy them out, take them over. There was 4 partners there at the time, but we had a bit of a handshake relationship at first right of refusal, so that's how we brought them into our tent. So the market is there. It's unlike any other industry, though. I mean, the market's exactly what it's going to be. So we've talked about this a lot. If there's 8 competitors or 4 competitors, it does not matter at all what we spend on marketing. We could all spend $100,000 a month on marketing, and guess what? The market's going to be the same size. We can't affect it.
Unless you just market cigarettes.
Yes, that's right. That's the other sideline. Or here, right? Anyway,
No hard hats.
Hard hats, yeah. Start lobbying against personal protective gear, yeah.
So that's right.
No seatbelts.
So there are some anomalies in the industry. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We have, over the years, we've started with Saskatoon Funeral Home as our base operation, then the crematorium. We have the Edwards Family Center across the street, our Prairie operation out on the highway, and we have a small in-town office right at Woodlawn Cemetery, and then Westwood's up by St. Paul's Hospital. And we also have a base operation in North Battleford and one in Humboldt. So
like with the existing, this is now just kind of, I guess, a question of future, I guess. Do we have enough land for funeral homes? Because, I mean, everybody in this room watching, I hate to break it to you, we're going to end up there. And is that why cremation's picking up? Or do you plot lands for like 100 years from now? Do you have?
yeah, there was a time a city did a study on Woodlawn Cemetery. That's the main cemetery at Woodlawn. And when they did the study, they'd predicted by 2020 the cemetery would be full. That study was done about 30 years ago. Given the current rate of cremation, they're now predicting they don't know when it'll be full, right? Because cremation allows the cremated remains to be buried in an existing grave, so lots of families will create a family plot by burying the urn in grandpa's grave, so you don't need the land. Or they'll take the urn back out to Kalonzi, where they grew up, right? Or they won't bury the urn at all, right? And they're also building the columbariums, which are structures for urns. So the rising rate of cremation has really taken the pressure off Woodlawn Cemetery, or the need for the city to build another cemetery. Yeah.
Go ahead, Ed.
I have a random question for them, but I've always wondered this. I work at Prairieland Park, and right across the street in Diefenbaker Park, there's a little cemetery. And it's a really strange place for one. I figured you guys probably know a little bit of the story behind that.
It was originally on that side of the city was a temperance colony, I believe. No bridge. So that was the cemetery of that colony and that neighborhood. And it's not in use anymore, but some really neat stories if you ever have a chance to walk through there and just see the headstones and some interesting just states of what life was like back then. Actually, there was, years ago, about 70 of those graves had to be moved to Woodlawn Cemetery because the river was slumping. So that was another project entirely. So some of those original burials in that cemetery were moved to Woodlawn. And a really interesting story that kind of speaks to the time of our history. In those graves, back when Spanish flu and that was very prominent, there would be a grave of a grandparent and a child in the same casket because the families were going through deaths of anyone who was not well. So it's sobering, but it does talk to our Saskatchewan history.
Yeah, so next time you're at Prairieland, check it out. It's a lot of fun.
And it's a lot of fun. Drive by, walk by the river. And I should mention, Steve's here with the Blades. There is another brand new cemetery in the city of Saskatoon. Some of you may have seen it in the press. With all the work of the Blades organization, we were able to help out and inter the cremated remains of Gordie Howe and his wife at Sastel Center. And that process, we actually had to create that as an actually bona fide cemetery where that statue is. So we now got 3 cemeteries, thanks to the Blades.
That's cool, yeah.
So, I mean,
Awesome.
It's funny. Yeah, give them a round of applause. Well, so you guys are working with other funeral homes too to help, and
Yeah,
why do you do that?
Well, I think in Saskatchewan we have that mentality of a helping hand when you need it is worth it, and you know that eventually you're going to need that person's help. We have competitors right in the city where we'll be just swamped with the number of services on a Saturday, and we'll call them and they'll provide a limo and a driver for us because we just need the extra help. We have partners or colleagues out in some of the rural areas that You're exactly right. Middle of the night, they've maybe got another event happening, another prayer service, and they need a hand. So they'll call us. We have somebody on the line 24/7. So it's just part of being part of a community, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. Saskatoon's been growing substantially, so there's a lot of people immigrating here and passing and probably wanting to go home, right? So what's that process I know you guys have been going through?
Well, it's, I mean, the technical term is repatriation, and you're getting somebody from where they've passed away back to their home or where their burial will be. And we are seeing, and we talked earlier about that rise in cremation rates, but Saskatoon's a really unique city in that the immigrant community, a lot of people who are coming to Saskatoon are more of a traditional mindset, and they may want a burial. The other thing is they may be the first of their family over here to start working. A lot of family, even their children, are back home, and it's a matter of figuring out, okay, well, if he is going back home, what's that process going to be like? And it involves quite a bit of paperwork, a lot of regulations, dealing with the consulate, and going through a lot of different steps to make sure that that's a safe passage. And some more recent changes with Air Canada, or not Air Canada, Air Cargo Security Program means that funeral homes who wish to do that need to be designated as known consigners. So it's a specific designation to be able to ship a casket overseas, or even in any public carrier, even if you're shipping a casket to Edmonton or Calgary.
So is that a process? Are you guys the only ones that have done that so far in the city, or?
I'm not certain if our competitors are
They're probably
approved yet.
They're probably doing Weekend and Bernie style.
Yeah, exactly. Just
Those guys are the worst.
but a case in point, I was working with a family, and she's said I'm okay to share this story, but her husband passed away in Mexico in a small town, and we needed to get him back to Saskatoon for the burial because they didn't want to cremate in Mexico. A lot of people say, well, if I die, just cremate me out there. But when the time comes, you don't really think, well, I've got kids at home. If you died while you're traveling, it's probably pretty sudden. And nobody's expected it, and they haven't had a chance to say goodbye. So that's still pretty important in our fabric as just human beings, to be able to see and say, yeah, that's what happened. So we were in the process of getting arrangements to get him home, and just days before his flight was supposed to take place, another funeral home in Mexico, and they have a lot of different regulations there than we do here, had shipped a casket to the States with drugs, full of drugs. And the United States just said no more caskets over landing in the States until this is all cleared up. So we had to make a lot of arrangements to figure out how do we get from Mexico to Canada without, and really there was just the chartered airlines, which don't have the room to accommodate a casket. So we found an airline that flew to Montreal and did a ramp transfer in Montreal and then to Saskatoon, but quite a process, and a lot of people just aren't aware of all that work behind the scenes. So it's labor intensive for sure.
And the funeral business can be expensive. And I don't mean that you guys are like hand over fist. I just mean the whole process. And something like that, you're adding substantial money to a funeral that was planned probably not being sent from Mexico, right? So how do you guys deal with that part of working with the families and trying to keep costs and being sensitive, not just to a loss, but also to the expense of a funeral?
Yeah. In the case of that Morgan just talked about, and in a lot of those cases, a person's travel insurance, if you bought travel insurance, will cover a portion of that, not necessarily all of it. Might cover bringing the deceased back in the casket, but then the 4 family members, how do they get home? They went down on a charter, right? We do have a product. We have a lot of families that will pre-plan with us and set money aside for a future death to be taken care of. But there's also a travel package. It's about $500, single pay once in your life, and that plan provides up to $100,000 to repatriate somebody who's passed away away from home. The money's available for all of travel companions to also come. So for people that travel a lot, it's inexpensive coverage, for that kind of thing, right? But
there's few professions that have not only the impact on people's lives, but have the exposure to sadness. Like when I can think of paramedics, firemen. Obviously, funeral homes are huge, and you have a fairly large staff. So there's not just this expectation of work, but it's also an expectation of balancing the empathy and carrying the burden of what you're watching all day and going home to your family. How have you guys managed that personally, and how do you manage that with your team? There you go.
It's tough.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's difficult. Anyone in a one of those caring professions that's dealing with emotion and any type of care really has to find that fine line, and it's different for everybody, but find the line where you are not letting that start to drive the rest of your life. So being able to, and you can't shut it off. I mean, anybody who says it doesn't affect them probably shouldn't be in this line of work, because you really want somebody working with you that does care. But it's a matter of, I mean, we all have to live a life that we enjoy, and if you get just bogged down in the thick of it, you're going to burn out pretty fast. And that's where a lot of funeral professionals do have trouble, and that's where having a good set of colleagues that can recognize that and be there for you when you need them. Case in point, if somebody has a family member pass away, the rest of the team rallies and just says, you're not going to deal with the details of this, you just be with your family. Yep. We'll take care of this other part of it, because it's just too close to home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So before we go to the crowd for some questions, I have one for Bill, because he's been doing this a long time. You've seen a lot. You gotta give me your strangest funeral story that you can tell us here, because there's got to be some crazy stuff you've come across.
We try to be unique. We've had a horse in our chapel. The fellow was Chester came to the funeral, and Chester. And we were meeting with the family, and the picture, Chester just kept coming up in the conversation, right? Because Joel looked after Chester, and so I said, do you think Chester would want to come to the funeral? All right.
You suggested it?
I suggested it. Wow. That's what we try to do, right?
So of course they checked with Chester. He said, let me get back to you.
Could he? Could we bring him? Yeah. So he was a little older horse.
Did Chester keep it together? Or?
Yeah, we had some plastic on the floor. So they brought him the day before, and we walked him through. We brought him into the chapel, so he's familiar with it and everything. And then at the funeral, at the end, the minister said a few words. Chester came in, stood by the casket, and then the brother of the deceased took his cowboy hat, head him out, and Chester headed us out, and off we went. So all kinds of unique, different things, right? And we've even had a Viking funeral in the Saskatchewan River, right? So we've done lots.
And I think that speaks well of you and your family and your business, that you have that flexibility and that ability to serve your clients that well.